Welcome to Cliff Richard The Vinyl Years. In this edition we're going to focus on his Christian and gospel recordings. When I was putting together these videos, I was looking for a reference point where I could find out what exactly the records that we should be covering. And I made reference to Wikipedia, the Cliff Richard discography, which is a fantastic resource. They're classified them slightly different than you would do as chronological order of records. However, they do have a gospel section of Christian songs, and although they cover vinyl, and that's extensively what we're looking at, they also cover CDs when it comes to this section. So when we look at the list of they've put on Wikipedia, they've put on the compilation albums and make reference back to the original albums. So what I'm going to do is cover today is a list that they've got there, which would give any fan or someone who is interested in that genre of music, it would give them an opportunity to, to cover everything that Cliff Richard's done pretty much. Alternatively, we know where we're going because these particular records are not on the mainstream. They are religious labels that I've put on these ones. Certainly the vinyls are. So once we've covered that, I'll look at the other recordings that he's put together. So that was his original mainstream albums and how he integrated those into his discography. The first two records we're going to have a look at is Walking Light and It's a Small World, which were both produced on the Mur label. Now, as far as the compilation goes, basically it's a greatest hits of Cliff's gospel records. Does it work? No, I don't think it does. On a personal basis, I think it's quite disjointed. However, from looking at the songs, it may well be that a collector can pick up a song that doesn't appear anywhere else. It'd be quite difficult, actually. I think probably any comprehensive compilation of hits will have all of these appearing on them. There is a couple of B-sides, so maybe I'm being slightly unfair there. Do the albums work on their own? You know what? Personally, I like my album to have a theme and it flows through. This has a theme. Does it flow through? It doesn't, for me. But that's not meant to be critical. It's more of Cliff Richard on a minor label will sell records. Well, I bought them, so I suppose that worked from that point of view. And then we'll look at the actual song listings. And It's a Small World. Devil Woman appears on there, which I would argue is not a religious song. Okay, it's got the word devil in it. And if we look at Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music, has more of a religious connotation than Devil Woman, which is about a guy who's been cursed and the cat, and I'm pretty sure you all know the story anyway. So maybe put on there, well, I don't suppose to fool anyone, but just because it kind of fits the genre. But I don't necessarily know these two albums work that well. The next two albums that fall into this category, hymns and inspirational songs and carols. Now, quite clearly, there's been a bit of thought went through this one, and the compilers have brought together exactly what it says on the cover. He's got hymns and inspirational songs, and another album he's got carols. And it's the first time we sort of leap back to the carols. It's interesting that there was an EP released in the late 60s called Carol Singers, and we'll cover a wee bit more about that later on. So these albums worked a lot better. Again, they were on minor labels and they had moderate success, but certainly definitely a favourite amongst collectors of Cliff Richard who like that genre. They're all well sung, and they work really well. It wasn't the first time that Cliff had put carols on vinyl. He managed to do that on an EP in the late 60s. And what we see, I've got a version of it here. You can see that's simply called The Carol Singers. And if we look at the B side, you'll see the sort of standard songs
Little Town of Bethlehem, etc., etc., appearing on the EP. Now, in terms of later on, he was still singing these same songs, but with different arrangements. He was absolutely trying to repackage them, make them more popular, put them into more mainstream, and we see a lot of evidence in that, certainly on his Christmas singles many years later. But that was in 1967. This carols came out. How well it done in the charts, it was very moderate success, but we're talking about a time where EP sales were dropping anyway. We always had, an EP was always defined by having 2 singles on either side, and sometimes played at 33 or 45. This particular one had 5 tracks on it, so it was like an extended play, 5 tracks on there, which would be close to sort of a 10-track album, so maybe half an album. So I think they needed extra marketing on that one. But anyway, it's a nice addition to have.
We have to break away from the vinyl to complete this section. What we see is lots of CD releases, and you can see from there the winner, Yesterday, Forever, Today and Forever, Rock Spell, Healing, Love, Songs of Inspiration, and although it's not listed on the Cliff discography, on Wikipedia at least, we have to recognise that Cliff at Christmas, a later on CD, which certainly covers the genre for us. The songs, the Yesterday, Today, Forever was a double album with 30 singles or 30 tracks on there, and was pretty comprehensive of everything that he had done. So it covered everything. The Healing Love is interesting. It was a difficult CD to get a hold of because it wasn't released in the UK. It was released in America only. So I had to get a copy from across the Atlantic, but managed to do that. Really, the tracking on these ones were, well, they were compilation albums, essentially. So couldn't go too wrong. And by this time, they had managed to get the flow a lot better on these albums. And on the CD, I think it works a lot easier anyway, simply because you can jump back and forward quite easily. In terms of the vinyl collection, none of this, or a lot of these singles that are featured on these one do appear in vinyl, but collectively together on the CDs. So out of interest, well, we should cover these.
Not covered in the list. There's lots and lots of Cliff Richard featuring albums and things like that. This one particularly I enjoy on there is the Kendrick collection, where Cliff sings 2 songs on there in a live setting. Personally, I think that live albums of Cliff, he's 100% professional and entertainment guaranteed. Never ever lets the fan down, and I've never been to a poor Cliff Richard concert. They're always been very entertaining, including his shows as well. On this particular one, I didn't manage to get to this, but he sings 2 songs on here. It was Burn On, and then on the other one, Shine, Jesus Shine, which, you know, for anybody that appears in church, when they sing this one, it's absolutely rapturous, and it actually captures the moment. Personally, I think Cliff goes up a notch when he's singing his Christian genre. But this would be a definite part of the vinyl collection, the Kendrick collection, although he's only singing 2 songs on it. I did manage to catch Cliff in 1991 in the Billy Graham tour, evangelical tour, and he sang 2 songs there. The Only Way In is the Only Way Out, and It's Free. So he sang in front of 120,000 people with Cliff Burrows, sorry, on piano and Cliff on a guitar, and absolutely superb renditions. What I would say there is, if you wanted to pick that up, you would only get that on YouTube, but it is available, and it's a decent copy they've got in there, and I think you'll capture the moment. the crowd are quite placid on there, but rapturous in applause. And like I say, you won't spot me in there. It was a big crowd, but I was certainly there and thoroughly enjoyed the whole event.
So when we look at mainstream records, we see here the Good News album by Cliff Richard. Pretty well his first gospel album. He stood in front of the Earls Court crowd. I think it was 27,000 were recorded being there, and proclaimed, "I'm a Christian." And went on, and it was true to his word. He went and produced this album the following year, and you can see from the song listings at the top right hand side. So Good News, he played on the announcement and had it as a newspaper, a great way of announcing front page news, if you like. So Good News was the first album that we see that Cliff was working on the religious songs, and in reality they were religious songs. That was a total removal from the pop mainstream. However, in the later albums he tried to pull that back together again, and I dare say successfully. The next album up was About That Man. It has the striking pose of Christ on the cross. There's no pretense here. It's as it says on the label. It's songs and some verses read out about Christ and his life on earth. Now, the picture here was painted by Salvador Dali, and it's actually is in the UK. It's in Glasgow, in Glasgow Cathedral, if you ever wanted to go and see that. But it's a striking picture and fantastic image of a faceless Christ on there. You can look into the thinking behind that one, but Salvador Dali didn't want to put a face on the image, but we all recognise the image by the pose and Christ on the cross. The album itself was another one committed to Christianity. Cliff at that time was interested in getting the materials out, supporting his faith rather than record sales. So, About That Man. His Land, the next album to come out, really was pretty removed from an album as such, because what we're hearing here is narration, stories from the Bible, and conversation basically throughout. There is some singing on it. Cliff's singing psalms in here, and we have narration from Cliff Barrows, on there as well. So it's an album. Is it appealing to Cliff Richard fans, or is it for that religious, the gospel side of things? Interesting from a collection point of view, because he totally embraced his faith and was standing up and saying to the establishment, "This is what I want to produce," and he's certainly done that one. But of course, this was a soundtrack to a film he had made. I think it was 1969, where he went to. He was in Israel, and the covers a lot of things, and this was the soundtrack from that particular video. So interesting part of Cliff Richard's journey. Small Corners is an interesting album because at that time, where Cliff was willing to walk away from pop music and embrace Christianity, he was at that time became popular for every time there was a TV show that they wanted a pop artist or someone to make a comment on. He was asked into the studio. He was appearing on TV. His profile went up, is where many had feared that would push him along a way of losing fans, and quite the opposite. I think probably opened up his fan base rather than removed any of it. But what he was determined to do was produce albums that embraced pop music within with religious connotations or gospel words. And I think probably sums up with the song, Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? Cliff actively went through to try and break that mould. And with Small Corners, he certainly succeeded. This was a great album, and certainly showed that he was more than capable of combining the both. And so probably from this point, what we start to see is that his mainstream albums, on the most part, were starting to have gospel or religious songs included in them. Although Small Corners, he made it very clear that all of this album was the Christian songs, but most or many of his other albums, he was putting in one or two songs to complement, so keeping both sides of his fan base happy. Personally thinking, I probably believe that they're one of the same, that Cliff's voice and his songs and his general production and things like that, he just had a great fan base anyway, and it was pretty straightforward for him to do this one. Certainly the fans were going to accept that. So the next album that came up and was full of Christian songs, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, it's a tremendous album, a personal, one of my favourites certainly, and he certainly at that time, you could easily argue that he had managed to bridge the gap between Christian music and mainstream popular music, and he certainly had achieved that with this album. He had a couple of hits from here, The Only Way In Is the Only Way Out, and Little Town, which was number 11, reached number 11 in the charts. But there's other songs on there. The interesting one is he looks so fed up on these. That's inside cover on there. But he done a couple of other songs, Thief in the Night, which he played at his concerts, and Where Do We Go From Here? So it's full of lots of great tunes in there, and we are certainly seeing that this genre now held no fear for Cliff. The final album we're going to feature today is Help It Along, which was produced for the Tear Fund to help African children. Cliff was very strong in heart about what his contribution towards charities was, and Tear Fund was a particularly big one for him. This is a fantastic album, great list of records that are produced and placed onto here. The gatefold sleeve has got pictures of Cliff on site, who's supporting his charity on there, and there's a nice wee couple of paragraphs talking about the charity itself. But ultimately this album certainly stood up on its own. It didn't need any gimmicks for this to be a great seller. We look at Jesus, Silvery Rain, Help It Along, all featured in singles. Now we look at it opens up with Day by Day from Godspell. So the stage show. So we're seeing a lot of fantastic records on here, and I can't speak too highly of this one. I just it's one of my all-time favourites, and this is about, I don't know how many copies of this. I think I wear them out or something like that, but I really enjoy this compilation or this album. It's I should also mention Sing a Song of Freedom on there, which was a good time for me for Cliff Richard. Is that it was songs I really resonated with, and I enjoyed them. So that was early 70s. Living in Harmony and stuff like that. Not a gospel song, but certainly round about this time. Anyway, so that's Cliff Richard, Help It Along. Well, that's all for today on this edition.
Maybe just be fair to mention that there was a couple of singles that were brought out in vinyl which covered the gospel side, but they'll be well known to fans from Saviour's Day, Little Town, as I've mentioned before, Mistletoe and Wine, all appeared in vinyl. And even Rise Up, which was one of the sort of later, that was brought out in vinyl as well. So we're seeing into the 2000s, so a really important genre, and for the collector of vinyl like myself, these were important additions to it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's edition. It was a difficult one, it was jumping around quite a lot, and I hope it all flowed for you watching it. Hope you can join me next time on Cliff the Vinyl Years for our next instalment and next genre. Not sure what it's going to be just now, but certainly hope you can enjoy me. I'd like to give me a like and subscribe to it. I managed to get a subscriber, which is thank you very much. And interesting, and just to leave you with this happy note is, I asked my mum to watch it, I asked her if she liked it, she said she did. I went great, so I was getting excited about my one like that I would get on the video, and there was no like, you know, the icon wasn't pressed. I called her back, I says, I thought you liked it, and she says, I did, and I says, but you never pressed the icon. Anyway, you can guess the rest. She's a lot older, maybe not as savvy with technology, but nothing better than your mum telling you she likes what you're doing. Anyway, until next time, see you.